Courtney Clenney, a popular 26-year-old OnlyFans model, was arrested in Hawaii on Wednesday, suspected of stabbing her boyfriend to death in Miami back in April.
We are charging 26-year-old Courtney Taylor Clenney with one count of second-degree murder in Christian's death.
She had a history of attacking.
Sorry. Just shut up! Give me my phone! Find it! Find it! Charge it!
Casey, I'm sorry. Just let me apologize.
No!
Right now, I have not always been a victim, but right now I'm a freaking victim in the situation. I'm scared to go downstairs and let my dog. I want a restraining order against Christian Obumseli.
I can't let this, okay?
It's my goal.
It was self-defense. My mom was on the phone.
Now, OnlyFans creator Courtney Clenney was facing murder charges for the death of her boyfriend, Christian Obumseli. But 4 years after Courtney stabbed Christian to death inside their Miami apartment, she just pleaded guilty to manslaughter and got 6 years in prison. And because she's already been locked up since 2022, she has around 2 years left to serve of her sentence. Now, I'm sure a lot of you guys remember this story because it went viral a few years ago. And at the time, this looked like it was going to be a pretty straightforward case. After all, Courtney admitted that she stabbed Christian and that the stabbing ultimately killed him. But Courtney maintained from the beginning that she acted in self-defense. And once investigators started digging into what was actually happening inside this relationship, the case became a lot more complicated than it initially appeared. Because long before Christian died, there were already signs that this relationship had become extremely toxic. Courtney and Christian started dating around 2020, and from the outside, they looked like another young couple living a flashy Miami lifestyle. Courtney had built a following online, was making serious money through OnlyFans. It was later revealed that she made more than $900,000 in 2020 during the pandemic and more than $1.8 million in 2021. By early 2022, the two were living together in a luxury apartment overlooking Biscayne Bay. But behind closed doors, their relationship was already falling apart. Police have been called multiple times. Neighbors complained about constant fighting, and the complaints got so bad that residents as far as 2 floors away were reporting disturbances. And building management was even looking into legal action to have the couple evicted. Now, both Courtney and Christian would eventually accuse the other of being abusive, and there were already incidents that made it clear things had gotten physical. In July of 2021, Courtney was arrested in Las Vegas after a domestic violence incident involving Christian. During that incident, prosecutors said Courtney admitted throwing a glass at Christian and acknowledged that she liked throwing things at him. Then over the following months, Christian started sending messages describing Courtney allegedly hitting him, spitting on him, and even stabbing him. In one exchange, Christian accused Courtney of stabbing him in the leg so badly that he could barely walk. And that wasn't the only alleged stabbing before his death. In January 2022, Christian suffered 2 serious cuts to his face that required stitches at the hospital. And in messages from that same night, Courtney told him, "Enjoy the hospital." And in another, Courtney apologized for hitting him in the face and the back of the head and for spitting on him. So by the time they moved into their Miami apartment in early 2022, this wasn't just a couple arguing. There was already a documented pattern of violence surrounding their relationship. Christian was also secretly recording some of their arguments on his phone. In those recordings, Courtney can be heard screaming at him, berating him, and repeatedly using racial slurs, while Christian is often heard apologizing and trying to calm things down. And then just a few weeks before Christian died, cameras inside their apartment building captured one of the most infamous moments in the entire case.
Noise complaints were common, releasing a video showing
The elevator footage of Courtney viciously beating Christian was recorded in February of 2022, just weeks before Christian was killed. And when prosecutors later released it, they pointed to the video as evidence that Courtney had been physically aggressive toward Christian long before the fatal stabbing. And the elevator video wasn't the only footage like this. Another video later released from a trip to Aspen showed Courtney striking Christian repeatedly during another argument. But this is where the story starts getting deeper. Because just 2 days before Christian died, police were called back to their apartment building. And this time, Courtney was the one asking them for help.
You want this person to completely disappear from your life. At the same time, you have him in your apartment here for 2 months with a ton of stuff in here.
On April 1st, 2022, building staff called police after another disturbance between the couple. And according to one employee, Christian had come charging toward Courtney in the lobby, and staff tried to get between them. When officers eventually arrived, Courtney was visibly upset. She told police that Christian was stalking her, said she was scared to even go downstairs and walk her dogs, and repeatedly asked how she could get a restraining order against him. At one point, she told the officers, "I have not always been a victim, but like right now, I am the victim in this situation." The problem was that Christian had been living in the apartment and still had his belongings there. So police explained to Courtney that they couldn't simply kick him out or trespass him from his own residence. The next day, Courtney emailed building management disputing part of what staff said had happened. She insisted the encounter never became physical and complained that police had been called unnecessarily. And somehow, despite Courtney telling police that she wanted Christian out of her life, the two reconciled. So the two had actually separated during the final week of March while Courtney's mother was visiting, with Christian moving out of the apartment. But they rekindled their relationship on April 1st. Christian returned to the apartment, and just 2 days later, he would be dead. On April 3rd, 2022, Courtney and Christian were back together inside their Miami apartment. Earlier that afternoon, things appeared relatively normal. Christian left the apartment to pick up food and returned a little after 4:30 p.m. Surveillance showed him returning at around 4:32 p.m. with Subway sandwiches and the couple's 2 dogs. At around the same time, Courtney had just finished and uploaded an Instagram live. But within minutes, another argument started. Courtney called her mother during the confrontation, and according to investigators, her mother later said she could hear Courtney telling Christian to leave, accusing him of lying. Around the same time, neighbors and building staff were already becoming concerned enough about the disturbance that security contacted 911. Then at around 9:57 p.m., Courtney made her own 911 call.
So my boyfriend is dying of a stabbing.
Investigators ultimately concluded that the stabbing happened within a roughly 13-minute window between 4:30 p.m. and 4:57 p.m. And this is where everything changed. Christian had been stabbed in the chest. On the call, Christian can be heard saying that he was dying and that he couldn't feel his arm, while Courtney repeatedly apologized and begged for help. When police and paramedics arrived, they found Christian bleeding heavily inside the apartment. Courtney was covered in his blood and told officers that she had been trying to save him. Investigators also later pointed to a text Courtney received from her mother at around 5:27 p.m. that mentioned self-defense and advised Courtney not to speak with investigators without an attorney. Christian was rushed to the hospital, but doctors were unable to save him. He was 27 years old. Courtney was questioned for almost 3 hours afterward.
Unfortunately, the doctors did what they could.
Christian is dead.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Still wearing her blood-stained clothes for part of the interview, and footage later released showed the moment detectives finally told her that Christian had died. Courtney never denied that she was the person who stabbed him. The entire question from that moment forward was, why did she do it though? Because Courtney's story was that Christian had attacked her first. She claimed that Christian shoved her against a wall by the neck, threw her to the ground.
Threw me against the wall, choked me. I mean, you're looking like this. He's never like choked me to where like it's like crazy stuff. But like, I mean, I couldn't breathe. Okay. Then he put me on the.
So he throws you against the wall.
Then he put me on the ground, choked me. That's happened.
She eventually grabbed a kitchen knife and threw it at him from around 10 feet away in self-defense.
Like I went to the kitchen and he started like charging at me, and I said like, I'm gonna like this at you. And he goes, do it, and then he charged me and threw. But he was far away, and I never in a million years like.
But investigators quickly found a major problem with that explanation. The medical examiner concluded that Christian suffered a roughly 3-inch deep stab wound to the chest, and investigators said the injury was inconsistent with Courtney's claim that she had thrown the knife at him from around 10 feet away. And suddenly what Courtney described as self-defense was starting to look very different to investigators. At first, Courtney wasn't arrested. However, she was eventually detained after the stabbing, but while speaking with police, she threatened to take her own life. Investigators spent the next several months going through the evidence and trying to determine whether this was actually self-defense or a homicide that should lead to criminal charges. In fact, a Miami police detective later testified that investigators initially believed the stabbing may have been self-defense, but that changed as they gathered more evidence. But by August of 2022, prosecutors had made their decision. Courtney was arrested in Hawaii and charged with second-degree murder with a deadly weapon for Christian's death. According to her attorney, Courtney had been in Hawaii receiving treatment for PTSD when U.S. Marshals arrested her. And when the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office announced the charge, they made it clear they did not believe Courtney's self-defense story. Their position was that Christian was unarmed, Courtney was the aggressor, and the physical evidence did match her claim that she had simply thrown the knife at him across the room. Prosecutors also released the elevator footage we saw earlier, arguing that it showed Courtney had a history of physically attacking Christian before his death. And Courtney's attorneys pushed back immediately. They argued that Christian had been abusive toward her, that Courtney had acted in self-defense, and that the elevator footage only showed part of what had been happening inside their relationship. Courtney eventually pleaded not guilty and remained behind bars while the case moved toward trial. And while Courtney sat in jail, Christian's family continued fighting the case from the outside. In April of 2023, his family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Courtney, arguing that she was responsible for Christian's death. And then her lawyers, meanwhile, continued insisting that she was the victim in the relationship and publicly said they fully expected the case to go to trial. They wanted to prove that she acted in self-defense. Then in 2024, the case got even messier. Christian's laptop had ended up with Courtney's family after his death, and eventually Courtney and both of her parents were accused of illegally accessing it. But while all that was being investigated, private messages between Courtney's family and her lawyers got pulled into the case too, and that created a whole new problem, because some of those messages involved how Courtney planned to defend herself in the murder case. Eventually, the separate computer charges against Courtney and her parents were dropped. By 2026, nearly 4 years had passed since Christian was killed, and despite all the time, Courtney still hadn't gone to trial for murder. But instead of finally getting the trial everyone had been waiting for, something completely different happened. In July of 2026, Courtney's attorneys announced that a plea deal had been reached. At first, the details were kept private, but on August 10, Courtney appeared in court and pleaded guilty to manslaughter. The murder charge was gone, and instead of potentially spending decades behind bars, Courtney was sentenced to 6 years in prison. She was also given 5 years of probation. But here's the part that really shocked people. Courtney had already been sitting in jail since August of 2022, so the nearly 4 years she had already served counted toward that 6-year sentence. Meaning after everything, the viral footage, the murder charge, the years of court hearings, Courtney is basically going to be released in around 2 years. And that's how a case that started with Courtney Clenney facing murder ended with a 6-year sentence, which is exactly why so many people looked at the outcome and felt like she basically got away with murder. And personally, I think that's exactly what happened here. I keep thinking about what this case would look like if the roles were reversed. Let's say if Christian had repeatedly been caught hitting Courtney, if she had secretly been recording him, screaming at her and calling her racial slurs, if she had sent messages saying that he stabbed her before, and then she eventually died from a knife wound inside their apartment that was caused by him. Imagine if that happened. I have a hard time believing he would have gotten 6 years. And somehow after everything that happened here, she's basically going to be back on the streets in like 2 years. That is absolutely insane. I think one thing this story goes against is the idea that a man can't really be the victim in an abusive relationship. Like we're seeing in this story, that's obviously not true. I just wish he had gotten out of that situation before it reached this point, because by the time this relationship finally ended, Christian was dead at 27 years old at the hands of Courtney. And Courtney Clenney walked away with 6 years. So she basically got away with murder. So insane, so insane. But I'm curious what you guys think about this story. I just feel like it's crazy how somebody can take a life in this manner and basically get away with it. That's so crazy, so crazy. But you guys let me know what you think about this story in the comment section below. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace, I'm out.